da aviação. E para moderar este painel, chamo Jeremy Salomon, da IATA. Boa tarde. Welcome to Portugal.
All right. Well, good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to this session. So we've brought together actually unfortunately virtually due to the travel restrictions, a panel of journalists from across Europe to discuss the future of aviation. So I'll let the journalists briefly introduce themselves, their names, where they're from, as well as the media outlets they represent or they contribute to, as well as their main area of focus. So honor to the ladies and then the alphabet. So Joanna, please, can you introduce yourself?
Thank you. It's an honour to be here. So my name's Joanna Bailey, and I am the editor of Simpleflying, which is an aviation news website. We launched about 2.5 years ago. I was one of the original team members. So we started small, but we've grown really quickly from just a handful of us at the start. We now have a team of 25 working remotely all over the world. So as well as the website, we also have 2 popular YouTube channels and a weekly podcast sharing all the aviation news. So thanks very much for having me along today.
Thanks, Marisa. Marisa, please.
Yes, hi. I'm sorry about the technical difficulties. My camera doesn't seem to be wanting to switch on. But I'm Marisa Garcia, and I'm from Spain, and I report out of Denmark on the global aviation marketplace. I have my own site at flightchic.com for over 7 years now. But I also contribute to publications like Aircraft Interiors International Magazine, the Runway Girl Network, and I have a column on flips.com.
All right, thank you, Marisa. Andreas, please.
Hello, bom dia, or boa tarde to Lisbon. It's a pity we can't be there. Do you hear me? I hope so. Good. I'm an aviation journalist based in Germany. I'm basically global reach because I'm really focusing not on German affairs so much, or not even European, especially general air transport all around the world. I normally visit airports and airlines almost everywhere. Of course, we're all stuck now in our home offices mostly. And I'm doing both work in German for like websites like aero.de, but also for many German public and aviation publications such as Flugrevue. There's also a Portuguese version of this Aviao Review, I think. And I'm also doing for many international sites in English, like Airline Quality in Australia and some others. So I'm happy to be here.
Thanks. John, over to you.
Boa tarde, bonjour, bonsoir. I'm John Walton, coming to you from France. I'm an aviation journalist focusing on a variety of areas. The passenger experience, airframers, largely commercial aviation. I write for a wide variety of publications, from CNN to Lonely Planet to The Air Current to Runway Girl Network. And it's a pleasure to be here.
Thanks, John. Last but not least, Kurt, please.
Hi, bon dia. I hope you can hear me. My name is Kudofan. I'm a correspondent for Aviation Week and Air Transport World, which is based in Washington, and cover a lot of airlines, mostly in Africa, Middle East, and Europe. But I also do a lot of work for our TV channels here in Austria, or also sometimes for Al Jazeera, and a little bit in Germany, but not that much. That's more the Andreas territory. And Portugal is one of my favorite places, so it's a shame not be there. I was more than 30 times in Portugal, so I hope I come back soon. But this is all related to this crazy pandemic travel restrictions, what we have to deal with, and now we're sitting all together at home. So nice to be with you today.
All right, well, thank you all for joining, and thanks for the perfect transition, Kurt, because I was going to start off by discussing a little bit the context of this event and our reality. So basically, you know, it's definitely, the situation is definitely not the one we had envisaged some months back. COVID-19 has completely revolutionized our lives, our reality. For aviation, it has meant actually the worst crisis in its history, going far beyond 9/11 or the financial crisis that started in 2008. And the restart is actually proving to be quite complicated. So right now, the harmonization of measures, widespread, affordable, quick, efficient testing to replace border closures and quarantines are clearly the focus at present. However, the main question we are here to answer and to address today is actually what future for aviation? So let's kick it off. Kurt, let's start with you. What can we expect in the next months, and who do you think will benefit from this crisis?
Well, what we see in the next few months, there will be a lot of difficulties. As you mentioned right now, we have the biggest crisis in the history of aviation. IATA explained that around 25 million jobs may be in danger, and there are up to 40 to 50 airlines worldwide which can go into bankruptcy over the next months, the next few months. So, especially here in Europe, we're entering now from normally we have in the high season in the summer make the airlines the most money, but not this year. So the airlines going now into the very weak season, into the winter, where they normally make not much, nearly no money. So it gets really difficult for many of them. I believe that some European carriers will see even more troubles during the next year because some airlines get a lot of financial support from the governments and so on, and some of the money will run out. So let's see if they will get more money, whatever. Benefits from the crisis, well, what we see now today, airlines have to restructure very quickly. We will see airlines with very modern fleet, very efficient, getting smaller, most likely, like Lufthansa mentioned, the fleet will shrink to about 150 aircrafts in the future. So there will be some winners of the crisis. I think the low-cost carriers will be the first one which come back a bit stronger because they do mostly point-to-point traffic here. Very difficult is the long-haul market. As we know, it's really challenging to travel somewhere in the US or Brazil from Portugal. So the restore of a hub business like in Lisbon or Frankfurt or whatever is difficult in these days, is expensive. So a lot of challenges ahead. And anyway, airlines will learn to deal with that, like many other crises they had, getting more efficient. But until they reach this level, we will see a lot of bankruptcies and a lot of airline collapses in the next few months.
Yeah. So thank you, Kurt. You mentioned this new reality that we're going to have to face. Marisa, what do you think the new market will look like? Can you dive a little bit more into detail into what we can expect?
Well, it's really, I think, a matter of not, those who predict the future are always at hazard, but we've been talking about a delayed recovery of air traffic. I think we might be seeing a reset for the industry. In other words, the delay may be so prolonged that it feels like a new business paradigm with new market conditions causing a shift of demand by customer profile. We've seen some recovery, but it hasn't been enough to put airlines on good footing as we enter this second wave. For now, any recovery is unstable when just a short period of market reopening over the summer led to new spikes in coronavirus infections. As IATA and ACI have recently pointed out, governments are going to have to lend some additional support, I believe, because the airline industry is going to be dealing with a restricted market for a longer period than we could ever have imagined. We've never seen a black swan event like this, and I don't know that we can even call it a black swan because if anything, it's an entire flock. So the viability of the airline sector to support employment is being challenged by the severe and prolonged fall in business, IATA has said, and they're right. ACI right now is estimating that the airport industry will suffer a 60% reduction in revenues, and IATA is estimating a 50% reduction in revenues. But the revenues alone only tell part of the picture. The fact is that we have assets in play that need to be properly used, and it's not clear exactly when those load factors will be at a steady enough rate that fleet logistics can be planned out properly. So in my opinion, it's warranted for governments to lend some support. First, although a lot of the argument is that airlines were privatized so that governments wouldn't have to prop them up, but when those commercial considerations were in place, we weren't in this situation that we face now. And there's still a vital element in national infrastructure and defense. If we look just at the logistics, forget carrying people alone, but if we look at the logistics of what happened shortly after the pandemic, being able to get necessary goods back and forth across countries still required airlines. And so, and of course, they were also critical employers. So keeping them healthy and keeping them going throughout this period is going to require some government intervention. And finance is part of that, but a lot of it has to do with governments taking the pandemic seriously and making rational, unified decisions about how to manage the spread of the disease. We haven't seen enough global collaboration on this point. If anything, we've seen quite the opposite from some key corners that should know better. And without a direct coordination globally, then a global sector, a global industry like aviation is going to see itself struggling indefinitely. So I know that doesn't sound very optimistic, but I believe that there is, an ability for greater coordination between governments, and there is an opportunity. Certainly, airlines and airport leaders have taken the lead in the ICAO Council as well. The Recovery Task Force has taken the lead. So we may see, a return of confidence in passenger confidence, and a return of individuals who need to go visit families. A lot more economy passengers. I don't know that we're going to see business passengers come back so quickly, because right now you have two forces driving that. On the extreme end of people who are doing well despite the financial crisis that accompanies the pandemic, you have people who are attracted to business charters and to even buying their own business jets. And on the middle end of that, you have entrepreneurs and businesses that are finding a way to work from home. But we know, just even by what we're experiencing with me right now, with the camera not working, Zoom can't do everything, We can't do business this way in perpetuity. We need these meetings to be in person. So in time, I think we're going to see a return of a certain class of business passenger. But just as we experienced post 9/11, we're going to see businesses be extremely careful with their spend, with their travel spend, restricting it to certain departments that are critical and to certain events that are critical, and perhaps not being as eager to pay for the higher revenue business passengers. So again, I see the future being a reset of expectations. I think it's something that we will, in the long term, overcome, of course, because the reality is that we are in a modern society that requires interconnectivity that only aviation can give. But until governments really start taking leadership of this, a lot of the burden is falling on airlines and airports to fill in the gap, and that's sort of unfair. So I hope to see that get sorted quickly.
Absolutely. Well, thank you. Thank you, Marisa. You just mentioned airlines, so this brings me to my next question, Joanna. So we just mentioned the market, and airlines will have to adapt. How do you see that happening? What can we expect from the airlines going forward?
Okay, thank you, Jeremy. I mean, it's a slightly contentious viewpoint maybe, but I think there are some silver linings to look forward to as a result of this crisis, and particularly in the shape of the global future fleet. We've already got a lot of clues of how that's going to look in the future. So, the quad jets were the first to be grounded, and they will be the last to return. So there's a number of airlines that won't bring them back at all. The last Cirium update, I think there's only about 35 747 passenger planes in service. Not many of the ones that are stored, I think there's like 120 in storage, not many of them will be coming back. The A380s may well come back, but only on some routes. Emirates, of course, is in a unique position in that they need to use the A380, but other airlines are not so keen to bring them back that quickly. You know, Qantas, Qatar, they're both looking at a long-term grounding. Air France, on the other hand, couldn't wait to get rid of theirs. They've long had a love-hate relationship with the A380, and of course, they're not the only quad jets. The A340 as well is less prevalent. But it's not just fleet going out, it's not just fleet leaving us now. Some airlines are still taking incoming deliveries, despite the fact that they're in this financial situation. So British Airways, we've seen the 747s out, but still the A350s and 787s are coming in. Qatar has recently taken 3 A350s this week. So, you know, of course there are some changes to delivery schedules. There may even be some order cancellations, but overall, aviation is coming back with a much younger, much more modern fleet. And that's a big win for everybody. You know, the environment, the passengers, and the airlines themselves. So environmentally, obviously, the modern twin jets are far more efficient than, you know, your A380s and your 747s. There's going to be a significant saving in CO2 as a result, which is, you know, that's going to be great for the environment. And of course, it's not just the quad jets that have gone, it's also the older twin jets, which again were not so efficient. So overall, you know, aviation is coming back with a lower carbon footprint. For us, the passengers, you know, we get more modern interiors, we get quieter, more comfortable planes. And of course, many of these new planes coming in will arrive as connected aircraft. So there's going to be more in-flight Wi-Fi globally. And, you know, I think some of these measures that are being taken for COVID safety, some of them are sticky. You know, enhanced cleaning processes, more intelligent boarding processes. You know, those things are going to stay with us long term, and that's going to be a good thing. I mean, who doesn't want a cleaner aircraft or, you know, to be boarded from front to back or in a better way than has been the norm? So I think some of these things are going to be really good. Some things won't stick. Maybe, I don't know, perhaps masks on planes. That's obviously not a popular move with passengers. So maybe when people start to come to terms with the safety of being in an aircraft cabin and the safe airflow that's going on there, those will disappear. But yeah, I think there's a lot of big passenger wins. And then, you know, for the airlines themselves, obviously, all these new twin jets that are coming in, they're much cheaper to run. And with airlines coming out of the crisis, servicing huge levels of debt in some cases, having a lower cost of operation is absolutely necessary. You know, it's going to be a huge plus point for them. They're also dealing with low passenger demand potentially for 2, 3, 4 years, depending on who you listen to. So running a fleet that's cheaper to operate and lower maintenance is a good thing. And actually, in some cases, it's really helping the airlines to do what they've wanted to do for a long time, but to do it quicker. So, for instance, I was listening to the Lufthansa CEO, Carsten Spohr, the other day, and he noted, you know, they wanted to get rid of these planes. It was all in the plan. They're not just getting rid of planes willy-nilly. This was absolutely scheduled in, but COVID has accelerated it. It's letting airlines benefit from modern aircraft sooner than they anticipated. So, you know, and as well as accelerating the fleet renewal, we're accelerating the move into new technologies. You know, I've already mentioned that we're going to see more in-flight Wi-Fi, but also we're going to be seeing new ways of using that Wi-Fi, new ways of using these new technologies. So, you know, for instance, Zipair, this new Japanese low-cost carrier this week, it launched with a smartphone ordering platform. So you can order your food and beverage and your duty-free from your phone in your seat. That's good because it reduces contact with crew. You know, there's no more trolley service. That's currently a high priority. But also it's a better passenger experience because no longer do you spend hours poring over the menu only to find out something is not in stock. It's a dynamic process. You know, it's much more accustomed to what we're accustomed to on the ground, if you like. It's an Amazon type service in the sky, and don't we deserve that? So, you know, in-flight magazines are going off, but they'll still be able to be offered digitally. And, you know, I think, like I say, all these things were in the pipeline, the fleet renewal, the move to digitization. It's just that COVID has pushed all these things up the list of priorities. So I do like to see the silver linings in a lot of things. And, you know, there's no doubt this has been a disaster for aviation. But as we're coming out of the crisis, you know, in 2-3 years' time, I think we'll be coming back with a much stronger, much more resilient global fleet and airline industry.
All right. Well, you mentioned the low costs, and that's actually a very, very important topic. And John, I wanted to ask you, do you think the low-cost model will prevail? And are we going to shift from flying luxury to the luxury of flying?
Well, Jeremy, I think that the trick with the low costs is that they will be able to take advantage much more than legacy carriers of the initial restart. There is obviously a hugely pent-up visiting friends and relatives demand at this point, and there's also a global economic crisis going on. So people are going to be wanting to travel as cheaply as possible, and that's where the low costs are going to come in. Fundamentally, though, the low-cost airlines can't cover the entire globe, or don't yet. So there is definitely going to be a role for all airlines. But look, we've seen after previous crises that people are looking for well-priced airfares. And that's a challenge for the legacy carriers. Are we going to need to see more basic economy, or indeed even basic business class fares put in, right? What can airlines do in a depressed business class market to look at the people who have not been, as our Australian friends would say, doing it tough in this economy, right? There are still going to be people out there who want to travel for upmarket leisure reasons. And so that's going to be really interesting to see how airlines respond to that side of the market, which hasn't been hugely well served by them in the past, right? Business class being business class for business. What about having business class for more comfortable travel for people who are not necessarily road warriors? And I think this sort of speaks to your question about, moving from the luxury flying to flying itself being a luxury. I think fundamentally for the climate crisis, we all have to see flying as a little bit more of a luxury than we have been. It can't be the same as taking the number 73 bus, right? Inherently, there are going to have to be changes. And I think that the faster the aviation industry engages with those changes, things like better integrating rail transport where that's sensible, right? Look, even here in France, where we literally have a TGV station at Paris Charles de Gaulle, it's almost impossible if you don't live in one of the handful of stations where you can get a connecting ticket to use that in any meaningful way. It's things like that, just figuring out, okay, how do we as airlines leverage the fact that actually quite a few of Europe's larger hubs are well connected to the rail network? How can we help people to make better choices even when they fly? How do we incentivize people to take initiatives themselves? And how do we as an industry take those initiatives on our part? Those are all really interesting questions to me. And that's something that I think we, as an industry, we have to answer.
Yeah, no, it's for sure. I'm going to look forward to see how it all evolves. And we talked about efficiencies, and Joanna mentioned as well the CO2 emissions and responsibility. So, Andreas, my next question goes to you. I wanted to see with you what positive elements we can look forward to, and more specifically from an environment perspective.
Yeah, indeed, Joanna has mentioned some of the aspects, for example, forced fleet modernization much quicker than we originally anticipated. I mean, the question in that respect is the phase out of the A380, for example, a positive thing? It was a fairly new aircraft which did not pollute a lot, and the opposite, as it was, if it was full, it was very efficient because it carried so many people at once. It was just one flight with 500 plus passengers if full, but even before the crisis, it turned out it was very difficult to fill, even for successful airlines on main hub routes. But in general, it's interesting how this crisis has brought momentum into all this. And there's also one other very important aspect I want to shed light on, because as we know, many governments have bailed out their national airlines. And the best case in point from my point here is France, where the French government actually kind of forced Air France to adhere to relatively strict environmental improvement goals. In Germany, there was much criticism that Lufthansa's bailout by the German government has not really been tied to any strict measurements like that in France. So that's a big discussion here in German politics in general, if Lufthansa should have gotten this money without having these strict goals attached to it. But in general, and I'm coming to my next point because as one of the results of this French arrangement, Airbus just came forward recently, a few weeks ago, with a very innovative and more wholehearted concept and complete concept of how aviation, sustainable aviation could look like in 2035. And it was much more concrete this time. We have always seen since decades nice graphics, videos, drawings of how the future of aviation could look like, but that a major manufacturer as Airbus really puts out a kind of a roadmap to this concept and also gives us specific aircraft types, even shows us how they could look like and how they would look in flight and how it's actually done, is to be propelled and propulsion by hydrogen. So it's not any fuels anymore, no kerosene at all, no fossil fuels at all, but fully run by hydrogen. Airbus has put out 3 different kinds of aircraft, which look quite interesting, because at first sight, 2 of them look very familiar. One looks basically like an ATR turboprop, and the other one looks basically like an A320 family jet aircraft. But of course, the clue here is that about 1/3 of the cabin of this aircraft, like the back third, is taken up by the storage tanks for hydrogen. Hydrogen is very difficult to treat. It's a big challenge. It has to be deep cooled, I think minus 273 degrees centigrade. It has to be compressed. So it's a very difficult fuel to handle. But once you've solved these handling problems and the structural challenges to include this big volume storage somehow in your airframe, it's very, very efficient. It's much more efficient, more energy efficient than any fossil energy could be. And the third concept Airbus put on the table is even more challenging and more revolutionary. It's a blended wing body that we're discussing since many decades. That probably the real next generation revolutionary aircraft will no longer have a tube with wings on, but rather be some kind of morphing form, aerodynamic form, rather resembling a flying wing, a blended wing body. So apparently the most probable design would be this A320 type of design. And Airbus in particular was stressing that it doesn't need any brand new revolutionary technologies here, but we can actually use basically existing airframes and integrate it into these. And probably people tell me they like the A320 type, or maybe the ATR type is the most likely to be a starter. But Airbus kind of commits and does so under the pressure of the French arrangements that by 2035, we will see aircraft just powered by hydrogen. Now, there are 2 challenges. One is the infrastructure for hydrogen on the ground, especially, is a huge undertaking, maybe even more so than doing this on the aircraft. And that's a huge infrastructure that has to be in place in a larger volume in order to make this practically and operationally possible. So that's some other big thing that has to happen before this actually can work. And one last point, some scientists have pointed out to me, as the Airbus program is called ZERO-E, for zero emission, and that of course means what it says. Airbus likes to have this meaning, but scientists tell me even hydrogen is still emitting basically contrails, so it's basically steam, so like vapors, and these are also relevant to climate and have this greenhouse effect problem for the climate. So these are some even unsolved things still, but in general, this is a good idea, especially now as everybody is so desperate with the current situation, to put out some hope and to lay out some roadmap and give people to think something concrete to think about, not just some abstract concept. So I think this was an interesting and probably very well timed initiative.
All right, thank you very much. Well, yeah, no, the environment is actually central to a big movement that we've actually witnessed specifically in Europe before the COVID crisis started. And the image of this movement, the one person that comes to mind is Greta Thunberg. So we only have time for one last question, and I wanted to ask you if you believe that actually that the new generations will be able to shape the aviation of the future.
The question from me, I suppose. I think the most important thing is that even more fundamental than these discussions I just talked about with the proposals for hydrogen aircraft. The main question that will face the aviation industry after this crisis is over is how much will this be causing a paradigm change in passenger thinking? We already heard today from our colleagues here that it's quite unlikely the business travel market will come back in the form it was before. But the more crucial question now, of course, is as airlines have to depend more than before on leisure travelers, will they actually be as happily flying as before? Because we all know this discussion about flight shaming and these things. So there's a good guess that it might not be the case. So people are now having to rethink their behavior in any way, in many areas of life. So many could say, okay, it was a bit stupid just to jump on every €9 ticket that Ryanair was offering to somewhere, and rather maybe fly less and more sustainable. And if that happens, a prerequisite for the airlines to get their markets back in a way is to be more sustainable. And interestingly, last sentence, they're really pushing this. So all the interviews I hear with Sir Tim Clark or other big airline bosses, like the second sentence, they're always saying, sustainability will be alive, and it's the most important topic still. And I'm heartened to hear that, because originally I was afraid that the survival mode right now is so extreme, which it actually is. But this is not forgotten, apparently. This is good.
All right, well, thank you very much. Unfortunately, we don't have any more time. So I'd like to thank all of you for willing to partake in this session, and for the audience to be able to benefit from your experience and your insights. Hopefully next year we'll be able to hold this in person, and in the meantime, enjoy the rest of the event and the upcoming weekend. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Be well.
Bye.